a lot of employers have moved to remote models, particularly for professional employees who have task-based work that doesn't necessarily require that they be in the office at all times. If you can have employees working remotely, a lot of industries have figured out ways to do this already to allow employees more flexibility, more free time. It's also seen as a more desirable option for a lot of families where you've got two working parents and you want to have one person at home who's available for emergencies or other issues. But that gets us to some of the downsides. Pre-COVID, a lot of companies that had transitioned to remote workforces started bringing employees back into the office. Bank of America, American Express, they had greatly expanded remote work and realized this was affecting corporate culture, and we want to bring people back in now. Because with remote work, the biggest downside is collaboration is harder, and it's harder to manage employees if you're using traditional models. If you've got older managers who are not as comfortable with technology, they may have issues effectively monitoring employees. And it's hard to maintain that workplace culture, that feeling, that sense that you're a team, right? If you've got everybody in the office and you've got an issue, you can pop down the hall to talk to somebody else. That's a lot easier than picking up a phone, trying to call somebody, potentially leaving a message. It affects collaboration, it affects employee engagement, it also affects educational opportunities. A lot of what employees learn is sort of picked up, not quite through osmosis, but from learning from other people at work and in the work environment. And so if they don't have access to that, when you move to remote work models, you have to find a way to adequately replicate that without sacrificing the other benefits of remote work. The other issues for, a big issue for remote work is if employees have children at home. Right now, I don't know how many of you have been doing Zoom calls, but I can't tell you how many Zoom calls I've been on with a client or a referral source when, the 5-year-old kid pops up into the screen. It's not easy necessarily to cordon yourself off. Do all of your employees have a dedicated workspace at home, or are they working in a bedroom or hiding in a closet to get away from their spouse or significant other and to be able to work uninterrupted? IT security is something that you need to pay close attention to. Are employees at home using public Wi-Fi that could potentially allow for hackers or others to access sensitive data that they may have on their laptops? This is not some isolated concern. Hackers have been active trying to get personal information, and if you do have a data breach, you need to make sure that you've got, first of all, before you move to remote work, you need to make sure you have a cybersecurity insurance policy, because if there is a data breach and customer information is exposed, depending on what information is exposed, if it's sufficiently private, you may need to send out expensive notices to everyone affected, which can affect your business's reputation, and it's definitely going to affect your bottom line. So you need to make sure that you have IT security plans in place to ensure that employees are using secured Wi-Fi connections and that access to your remote network is through secured means, so that individuals are not, unauthorized individuals are not accessing your company network and potentially accessing sensitive files and information. It's also a little bit harder to monitor employee conduct when they're not at work. You can send emails and you can make phone calls, but you don't necessarily know what they're doing on any given day. And that, again, that gets to the piece of managing can be harder, and for employees with task-based projects, those are a little bit easier to monitor because you have just, explicit work product that you can identify and say, all right, you had these projects to work on, this, they're moving along nicely, everything's fine. On the contrary, you have these 3 projects, you're way behind on deadlines, struggling to get projects done, that's an issue. But things like, employee harassment, you've got to be you're looking at Facebook or LinkedIn or other messaging services to see what people are doing. Are people texting one another? Are there phone calls going on? Are employees feeling isolated? All of those things, you have to be conscious of them, and you have to be proactive in making sure that everything moves forward without a hitch. This gets us to the issue of temporary versus permanent. You know, right now, a lot of businesses have essentially been forced to move to an entirely remote workforce. As businesses start to reopen, you face a choice. Do we want to stay remote, or do we want to start bringing people back in the office? For many businesses, remote work will likely be a longer-term must as business operations are limited due to COVID-19, or as employees are not available to come into the office due to school and daycare unavailability. For others, it may lead to permanent changes in how you do business. If you're looking at a remote work environment, do you give employees greater flexibility and say, look, in the past, we wanted you in the office 40 hours a week, we needed that face time? Or are you seeing that, you know what, as long as the projects get done, we don't care how many hours you're working. If you're on billable hour projects, obviously that's a different consideration. And then for others, it may be, look, as soon as the pandemic is over and we can get people back in the office, we need them back in the office. We need that face-to-face time, and we need to figure out a way to do it. You know, in preparing for this webinar, talked to a lot of clients, listened to a lot of webinars, and came across an interesting anecdote that there was in fact a symphony orchestra that figured out a way to rehearse and practice remotely. And for me, initially when I heard the story, I thought, okay, there's no way. You know, a symphony orchestra, there's so much body language, there's so much coordination that needs to come in. There's no way that they can figure out a way to do this remotely. It's just not possible. And they found a way. If you're flexible and you're open-minded and you're willing to embrace sort of the spirit of experimentation as we move through this, there are ways to make remote work for just about everyone. You know, technology is advanced. You know, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do this sort of video call, and here we are. So be open-minded, be willing to explore, talk to your IT providers, and if you need to do a more long-term solution, make sure that you research what products and programs are available that can allow your employees to collaborate in real time, you know, while apart. The next issue I want to touch on while still moving forward with a little bit of speed is maintaining workplace culture. This is a huge issue for a lot of companies that move to remote work. It's one of the most difficult things to maintain in a remote environment. Phone and email communications are not the same as in-person interactions. If you think about it, how much is conveyed via body language, posture, facial expressions, so much communications, particularly with email. If someone is, you know, a lot of how an email is interpreted depends on the mindset of the person reading the email. If they're nervous or anxious, a simple request may come across as much harsher than a simple check-in. You also need to make sure that when you're communicating with employees that you're explaining much more than you would otherwise. You know, when you're down, you know, if you're managing an employee, you're just down the hall, you can pop in and just sort of check in and say, hey, how are you doing on XYZ? And it may not seem to be overbearing or obnoxious or, getting into, micromanagement. However, if you're calling somebody every day, if you're emailing them every day, that can convey a lack of trust. And so you need to make sure that in terms of your workplace culture, you're maintaining open lines of communication, explaining to some extent why you're doing certain things. A lot of times when you're moving to a remote environment, the communications tend to be task focused, and employees can sort of feel like it's almost like running on a treadmill, right? All you're doing is just the physical monotony, or you're so focused on the task. You're not getting the sense of the bigger picture of what the other employees on the team are doing, what other pieces are in play, the other successes. You can feel disconnected from the group as a whole. And so you want to make sure that you're letting people know and sharing that information in a way, again, that doesn't come across as micromanagement, because drop-ins, informal discussions are more difficult. for workplace culture, issues is mentoring, and we're going to get to that at another time. But so much of mentoring is sort of a natural, organic process where you can find employees or newer, a lot of times it's older and younger, where they see something in the other employee and say, you know what, I'm going to take this person under my wing and help them develop. That doesn't happen organically in a remote environment. And so if part of your workplace culture is helping train and mentor younger, having the older employees train and mentor younger employees, you need to be very conscious of that and to find ways that those organic connections can be replaced through more formal methods, whether it's through a mentoring committee, whether it's finding assignments, or whether it's having somebody that knows the two employees well, set up an in-person meeting where they can actually get to know one another without having to do everything remotely. That being said, difficult does not mean that it's impossible. One of the ways that companies have sort of tried to keep their workplace culture moving forward is by having virtual meetings, whether it's Zoom, Google Hangouts, to supplement face-to-face discussions. You also should encourage managers and mentors to conduct informal check-ins and set up times when you can meet an employee in person, whether that's outdoors, go for a socially distant walk somewhere where they can sit, stop, check in, talk to the employee, not just about the work, but also what's going on, what their stress levels are like, what their daily life is like, whether they've experienced any challenges, but do it in an informal, in-person way where you're not going to get miscommunications caused by the use of technology. And the other thing is, keep in mind that one of the big things you're losing when you move to a remote workforce are those in-person interactions and the socialization with your coworkers. And so a lot of companies have, especially at the outset, I don't know how many are still doing it, but I'd recommend that they do, is setting up programs that allow employees to interact in a non-work setting. So things like online trivia, exercise classes, cooking classes, virtual happy hours, things like that can help maintain that sort of sense of we're all a team, we're all in this together. The people that I work with are people that I know and trust and like, so that you don't end up with everybody off, siloed away, isolated from one another, feeling like, all that work is for them at this point is just tasks that come through via email or phone calls. That gets us to the next piece. Ensuring effective collaboration. Most of us don't work on our own projects all the time where we're away from everybody else. You need to work together. Again, in a remote environment, collaboration can be difficult, but this is where you want to use technology, use tools to implement collaboration and find new resources that you may not have known existed before. Before we talk about those resources, though, we need to talk about some of the standard hurdles that people face in trying to collaborate online or remotely. Number one, employees may not be working a standard schedule. If you've got two employees at home, two individuals at home, husband and wife, and they've got 3 kids, both are working remotely. One may be working remotely in the morning and spending time with the kids, while the other one works remotely in the afternoon, and the other one spends time with the kids. Or you may juggle it based on who has calls at different times. People may say, okay, look, I'm working remotely, I'm working on these projects. I do better work in the afternoon and evening, so I'm gonna sleep in the morning. And whereas you've got early risers that they like to start the day, hit the ground running, and they're calling and emailing at 8, 9 a.m. so that they can conclude their workday at 2 p.m. You need to figure out how you're going to handle these scheduling issues and communicate those with one another so that employees are still able to accomplish the things that they need to do while still having some of that degree of autonomy and flexibility that everyone desires when they're working remotely. For most employees, working remotely does mean a shift from the standard 9 to 5. And so if you seek to impose that, you may get some pushback and you may have some difficulty. And you may also have employees that are not necessarily sticking to that in an honest fashion. The other thing you need to remember is employees may not have a dedicated working space. Most employees right now didn't go into the pandemic planning that they were going to be working from home. And so they may not have a dedicated office space in their house. They may not have a space where they can close the door and work. And so you need to keep in mind that when you're having employees collaborate, talk to your employees, figure out how they're working, and go from there when it comes to collaboration. The other piece is real-time file sharing. If you're based on your existing systems, that's difficult. Talk to your IT provider, talk to your technology providers, because there are, for almost every program now, there are ways to do real-time file sharing or screen sharing. And so if that's an issue that you need to address, work with your providers, work with technology to figure out how you can do the real-time file sharing to allow employees to collaborate. Again, when you're implementing strategies to allow for collaboration, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. For some projects, virtual meetings may be great in order to supplement or replace face-to-face discussions, particularly when we're dealing with Zoom here. You can get screen sharing as long as everybody knows how to use it. That can supplement face-to-face discussions. Again, find out what other technological solutions are available to supplement existing systems, and then determine whether some in-person meetings are possible and appropriate. One of the things a lot of businesses are looking at now are not a full remote model, but a partial remote model. And that can help alleviate a lot of the issues around collaboration. One of the things a lot of experts recommend is you structure the work week in a way where employees are in the office for time that they need that in-person, face-to-face communication. They need to collaborate. They need to be working with others. And then they then take home the work that they can do remotely. So for example, if you're working on a project, you have everybody come in on Monday, sit down in a room. There's 5 people working on one project. Come in on Monday, they sit down, they hold a meeting, parcel out the work, figure out what tasks everybody's going to do and the timeline for when they're going to do it. Then everybody takes their piece and they go home on Tuesday and Wednesday and they work from home on those pieces. They can be flexible. They've got their marching orders. They've got their plans of what they need to do for those next 2 days. And then you come back in Thursday for another round of in-person check-ins and meetings to figure out status, troubleshoot any issues, coordinate the next phase, figure out where everyone is. And then again, you take everything back take everything back home on Friday over the weekend for the next stage of proactive work. That sort of blend system helps maintain social distancing. You don't have all your employees in the office on any given day, and employees are still working remotely 3 days a week, but they're in the office 2 days a week or for 2 half days, whatever you need. But the idea is keep an open mind, be flexible, look at the existing requirements and figure out what do my teams, what do my managers need in order to effectively collaborate, and how much time does that actually mean they need to be in the office. The other piece is in some aspects, you need to ensure that employees have designated times for meetings where they're free from distraction. We talked, I mentioned earlier, employees with kids at home doing virtual learning, they've got kids running in and out of the room. One of the things you need to communicate as part of any remote work policy and plan is that employees need to have time where they can be free from distraction to actually complete their work. If they're not able to do that, then you need to explore other options for those employees. And that again gets to sort of the basis of remote work is remote work isn't a one size fits all for everyone either. If you have employees that just simply can't work from home, you need to explore how to bring them back into the office in a way that they can complete their projects. Otherwise, no business is expected or required to pay their employees to parent full time, except under the, New Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which provides for 10 weeks of paid leave when employees are unable to telework due to childcare. But beyond those existing legal leave policies, if employees are coming back to you and saying, look, I appreciate that we've moved to a remote model, but I can't get things done at home, is there a way to come back in the office or find an alternate space? You want to work with people to try to figure out, okay, is there something other than just having everybody work from home that we can look into so that this can move forward? Employee management and engagement is the next topic. When you're dealing with employee management in a remote environment, again, flexibility is critical. You need to look carefully at how managers and supervisors are going to manage their employees' workflow. Frequent open communication is critical to this piece. Again, you don't want your employees to feel like they're being micromanaged. And so if your managers are used to sort of going around and having informal check-ins every day or every other day, if the project doesn't actually require that sort of day-to-day check-in, if they're doing that through a phone call or email and not explaining why they're doing it, it may come across that they're micromanaging their employees or that they don't trust them. And that can be a huge issue for your corporate culture, and you don't want that to take place. So again, communicate not just about the projects, but why you're having the communications in the format that you are and why you're doing the frequency. Explain, in order to facilitate communication and troubleshoot any issues early, we're going to have daily check-ins, or we're going to check in twice a week at these times. That way the employees aren't questioning why they're doing one thing at one time. It's just everything is straightforward. They know why they're being called or emailed, and they don't have to worry about trust. The other piece about frequent and open communication is about work schedules and expectations. You need to be upfront and honest with your employees about what's expected of them, when they're expected to work, when they're expected to be available, what the timelines are for projects, what the deadlines are. There's so much that is either unspoken or handled informally that when you move to a remote environment needs to be explicitly addressed. If you're going to require that employees be at a desk logged into your system from 9 to 5 each day with a program that tracks, are they actively using the computer with like a red light, yellow light, green light? You need to let employees know that that's what we're doing. That's how we're monitoring your workflow. For other employees, you may say, look, as long as the work gets done, we don't care when you do it. If you say, look, we're going to have email, when I send you a work email, I need a response in half an hour. Others projects, you may say, look, if I send you an email, I need a response in an hour or 2 hours, or just an acknowledgement that you got the email. For these different pieces of the communication about the policies of responsiveness, timeliness, availability can go a long way in ensuring that your remote work is successful. You also want to create opportunities for small in-person or video meetings still. Again, when you're going to remote work, you still want to have ways that people can be face-to-face and not feel isolated or like they're on an island. Part of management is getting that sort of real-time feedback from your employees about how they're doing, how they're working, how they're feeling. The last piece is you need to document performance issues and how they're going to be addressed. In any sort of economic downturn, the number of discrimination charges, filings, lawsuits arising out of wrongful termination exponentially increase. During the height of the Me Too movement, the number of sexual harassment and discrimination lawsuits that were filed against employers was still vastly lower than the number of discrimination lawsuits filed during the housing downturn in 2008 and 2009. Cultural forces play a much, much smaller role in wrongful discharge lawsuits than economic uncertainty and recessions. We're clearly in a recession now. Employees are looking for any port in a storm. And so if you're not documenting performance issues and discipline issues, if an employee then later needs to be terminated because they're not completing tasks that they're assigned remotely, you're more likely to face a lawsuit because there aren't other job opportunities available for those individuals. And particularly keep in mind that as of right now, on July 31st, the supplemental unemployment benefits end. Weekly benefits in Maryland are capped at $420 per week. That's a very, very low number for most employees. It's a fraction of what they were probably previously earning. And so if employees are looking at, well, I can have unemployment or I can file this lawsuit against my employer and maybe they'll throw me $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, you're going to get those lawsuits. The other piece is employee engagement. Employees work remotely, again, can feel disconnected. That's the number one problem that employers have to address. Virtual and online wellness programs can help, virtual social events. The big thing is mentorship programs. So much of mentoring can be informal. And so you need to figure out ways that you're going to have a formal mentorship program to train and acclimate your new employees to workplace culture. If you just have, if you're lucky enough to be doing hiring right now and you just have a bunch of new faces popping up on the Zoom group call and people don't know who those individuals are, those new individuals may not feel welcome to the company. They may not feel incorporated in the company's culture. They may feel isolated. And so you need to figure out how we're going to have a formal mentorship program to help these individuals feel like they're part of the company culture, that they understand the company, both in terms of the work that you do, but also the work environment. All the intangibles that make work a fun place to go, a place that you like to be, a place that makes you happy and engaged and feel fulfilled. Because more often than not, that comes from not just the sense of an employee's own work, but a sense of the collective mission. How do you communicate that collective mission to employees? The history of the firm, the history of the company. How do you communicate that to your employees? You need to make plans and have robust education and supplemental programs to allow employees to feel like we're all part of this. We're part of a team. We're engaged. I want to do my best work, not just for myself, but because I care about the company, the firm, and its future. Again, we're getting a little bit crunched for time, so I want to get into protecting confidential information. Data security is critical when you're moving to an online environment. You need to make sure that your employees are using non-public password-protected Wi-Fi and that you've got policies and procedures in place to ensure that employees are following certain safety protocols. Your IT providers can help you with these, but a number of things that you need to have addressed are employees, making sure that employees are not sharing their laptops with family members. When they're not working, are the employees' children going on YouTube or downloading games and apps? You want to make sure that the laptops are set up to automatically update their virus protection programs. You want to make sure that if they're connecting to your work network, that you've got network security protocols in place. For our firm, for example, we use this program called Duo. And so that when I go to log in remotely to my computer, I get a push notification on my cell phone that I have to go and approve to say that, yes, it's really me that's logging in, that it's not someone else. Employee communications with clients, you need to ensure that they're using work email, not personal email. Because if the employee then leaves the firm, if they've been using personal email, you have no way to retain those communications and no way to keep track of what the employee is communicating. If you've got non-solicits and confidentiality agreements, if employees are using their own cell phones to communicate with clients as opposed to a work line that's then forwarded to their cell phone, or a work provided cell phone, if you're going fully remote work, highly recommend that you provide employees with cell phones with a number that the company, control, so that after the employee separation, you're not then trying to track down, okay, who were they talking to? What projects were they working on? Do I have to worry that this client's going to leave with this employee? Cybersecurity insurance is a must. Hacks, breaches of confidential information, customer privacy violations, these can all be massively expensive. It may not seem like a big deal sending notices to people, but if you're maintaining sensitive customer information, you really, really need to look at cybersecurity insurance in the event of a hack. The last piece I want to get into today is adapting company policies to a virtual workplace. Making a short or long-term change, many company policies may need to be changed. Working hours. Are you going to require employees to be at their desk from 8:30 to 5:30? Are you going to have an hour lunch break, or are people going to work through lunch? How are they reporting their time? Do you have an ADP? They have a mobile app. I think Paychex does as well, where you can just log your time in through a smartphone. Or are you going to have people email them in? Policies against workplace harassment will need to be updated and address virtual or online harassment, posts on Facebook, posts on social media, and other issues that may not necessarily already be on there. Social media policies certainly need to be addressed, because if employees are working from home, obviously they've got more time to be on their computers and working remotely. Sick, vacation, other paid time off. How are you tracking it? How are you logging it? If you've got employees telecommuting, you may not necessarily need to have the same sort of strict policies related to if you take an hour or two off. You may want to move to, okay, you use PTO in 4-hour blocks of time, because the expectation would be, look, if you've got a doctor's appointment in the morning, if you're working fully remotely, you can go to that doctor's appointment and still work the full workday. You don't need to log 2 hours of PTO for that. Conversely, if employees are working from home and they're only available half the day because of childcare unavailability or school unavailability, you want to address how that's going to be handled under your leave policy. If you've got policies where you're paying employees for travel or parking stipends, you want to look at suspending or eliminating those, because if employees aren't coming into the office, do you really need to be providing that at that point? There's a lot of little minutia here, but again, when you look at your employee handbook, you want to look at it and say, are these policies that are addressing in-person issues, or do the remote issues that we face, are they being addressed by our company policies? The last piece is new policies. The last slide we talked about modification. There are many new policies that you may need to implement, including, again, safeguarding company information and privacy, telecommuting policies that outline what the expectations are for the dedicated workspace, availability requirements. Are you going to have reporting and check-in requirements? How are they going to be, how are they going to be keeping time? Does an employee have to have a dedicated workspace? Do they need to be at a desk for a set number of hours? All of those things are things you're going to want to communicate to your employees in new company policies beyond just what beyond what your existing policies may be. I know we covered a lot of information. A lot of this was high level. We're at about the 45-minute mark. I'm happy to take any questions that people have now related to sort of what we've covered so far today.
Thanks, Greg. We're monitoring the chat to see if any questions coming in.
Yeah.
None so
and
far.
And if
yeah, you could unmute.
If you're dealing with if you're dealing with something and you're not you don't want to put it in public, my phone number and email are on the screen now. If you want to reach out and say, hey, I attended your webinar, have a quick question, but didn't want to put it in front of the whole group, I'm happy to answer questions, and follow-ups that people may have. If they, it's an hour later and you say, oh, wait a minute, now I have a question. Please feel free to submit those as well.
I have a question. So I guess our general company policy prior to COVID was more like you're an adult, get your work done. As long as it's done by the deadline, it's fine. And now with COVID and everyone working from home, I guess we have had some people go off the rails a little bit more, and I don't know specific details, but I know there's been talk about having computer monitoring software put on, or ways just to better monitor the work that employees are doing. And you had kind of mentioned one strategy, but I was wondering if you could touch on some other ways that people, like managers, can check in on their employees, or is it with a computer monitoring software? Is that the best way to go? It kind of seems like a trust thing and like against what our previous culture was, but I don't know if there's a better strategy or not.
Right, and that's a huge issue that we're saying, and I've been as the pandemic has proceeded and people have been working from home longer and longer and longer, and the issues have continued to mount. What a lot of people saw as short-term hiccups are now becoming long-term hiccups, and they're things that have to be addressed. You know, a big thing is that trust is a two-way street. And so employees have to earn and maintain that trust as well. And so if the corporate culture was, we trust you to be grown-ups and get your work done, and we're not going to sit here and monitor your keystrokes or how long you're logged on to the company system, that also requires that the work actually get done. And so there's two pieces. Obviously the number one thing is if there are projects that are behind and that aren't being completed, the supervisors and managers should be documenting that and identifying the precise deficiencies so you can figure out how that needs to be addressed. It may be something where you can say, all right, look, because you're not getting projects, we gave you a week to get to the project and all of a sudden it's Friday morning and it's not done and we haven't heard from you all week. It may be something where you say, we need milestones Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and failure to complete it's going to result in disciplinary action. If it's something that is just simply, we think projects aren't getting done because employees aren't spending enough time, then there are computer programs and there are a number of companies that have used these systems in the past where when you go to work in the morning, you log onto your computer and you open up a program, whether it's, one of them used to be Skype for business, and there were a few others, but they could actually show when the person was active on their computer working on the program so that it would give like a green light if they were currently active, it would go yellow if they were idle for a period of time, and then red if they were away for too long. And so managers could sort of look at a dashboard and say, hey, you were red for 90% of the day. What's going on? Why aren't you working? And so depending on what the employees are doing, what their tasks are, you want to look at, what levels do we need to reach to ensure that projects are being completed in a timely fashion. It also is something that it probably needs to be addressed through an informal communication to say, look, we've given you these projects and they're not getting done. What's going on at home? What barriers are you facing? What's preventing you from actually getting this work done? And how can we help you get the work done? I know from talking to clients and colleagues and friends that, the school, the childcare and daycare issue is a huge problem. But there are resources and there are things available. And so if somebody comes to you and says, yeah, look, I just can't get this stuff done because I've got, 3 kids running around the house all day, you may want to work with them and sit down and say, look, here are the names of some daycare providers you need to go talk to because we'll give you some time to line someone up. But if in 2 weeks we don't see an improvement, we're going to have to discuss other corrective measures. And as far as the trust environment, obviously that's a huge thing for your corporate culture. And so it may be something where as part of the communications, you're explaining and communicating that if you don't meet the requirements, you're not getting things done, you're starting to have lag time or performance problems, then we'll implement these other measures. And that by meeting, by returning to satisfactory performance, we'll take them away, essentially give them, individualized things to the point where you say, look, we will trust you so far as you can be trusted. And really that helps put the ball back in the employee's court. But again, the main thing I would emphasize right now is be flexible and communicate before just sort of jumping to an across the board, program that shows how long they're logged into the company system each day.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in. If you have a question, you could just unmute yourself and ask the question. And if not, let's see. Well, as you mentioned, Greg, you made your contact available, so you're willing to respond to any sort of follow-up questions, right? So,
Yeah. So, I think we could probably wrap up.
yeah, okay.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for your time and attention. And if you do have follow-up questions or particular issues, we're going to forward the slides around. My phone number and email's there. I also do use LinkedIn. So if you connect and message me on LinkedIn, I'll also respond in that way too. So whatever people feel comfortable with and whatever people use, I am accessible and available and happy to talk all things remote work as issues may arise.
Hey, Greg, I actually had a follow-up question to
Sure.
an earlier one. So